but are they still worth reading? Hey book buddies, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and I want to start a new series of videos that I'm going to call Book Chat, where I introduce discussion topics that we can all spout our opinions about. I don't want this to be like a university literature seminar, I just want a casual chat, because I read books and I have feelings. So grab your favorite hot beverage, a cup of coffee or cup of tea. I'd love to chat with you about your thoughts in the comments below, or if you have your own channel, feel free to make a reaction video. So today I want to talk about the problem of reading so-called classic literature, especially books in the Western literary canon that often include sexist, racist, and homophobic scenes, characters, or themes. There's a lot of classic books I could talk about in this context, but I'm only going to talk about 3 here. Mainly I'm going to talk about this big sucker right here, because the booktuber Adam at Memento Mori, he's doing a whole read-along centered around the Decameron this month. This is a massive 14th century book about horny teenagers trying to distract themselves from the horror of the plague by telling each other dozens of stories. I'll link his video about it below. So I'm reading along, and a disturbing theme I'm finding in a lot of these stories is that they frequently objectify and sexualize women in a misogynistic way. Big surprise, this was written in the 1300s. Yeah, but the problem is the way these stories are presented to be laughed at. Many of the stories read like anecdotes or extended jokes with a punchline. For instance, a man enters a convent full of horny nuns. He pretends to be deaf and dumb so he can sleep with them, and the nuns all take turns jumping his bones. Okay, that is funny, if slightly creepy that the nuns would take advantage of a man that they think is disabled, but it is an adult man who fully consents. Next, a girl comes to a priest looking for religious education. The priest can't control his hard-on, so he calls it the devil, and he says he can only stop the devil by putting it in her vagina, which he calls hell. He does this and the girl likes it so much, she continues having sex with him and with as many people around her as possible, calling it a religious experience. That's not so funny. That's molestation, because the story explicitly states that the girl is 14 years old. She's naive and looking for a religion. That's the same way that figures in authority, especially religious authority, have manipulated and abused young people and vulnerable people for centuries and up until the present day. But there's no doubt in my mind that both of these stories were meant to be read as funny jokes. That's just gross. Now you could say that Boccaccio was just exposing the hypocrisy and abuse enacted by corrupt members of the church. There's a lot in this book mocking dysfunctional clergy members. Great, but that doesn't change the fact that frequently in these stories, women are kidnapped and cry, but eventually enjoy having sex with their abductors. There's a story in here about a woman passed from man to man without her consent, but ends up loving it every time. I'm not being prudish. If women or men want to go out and have sex with as many people as possible, go for it. And I'm not saying that men shouldn't write stories about women in these difficult situations or who go through a lot of peril. What's insidious is the way that these stories consistently portray women who are sexually insatiable while also being objectified and abused and treated like a piece of property. Yes, there are some strong, dynamic female characters in this book, but even in those stories, if you look at them closely, show women acting pathetically just to get with a man. So should this book still be read? Or should anyone still be reading it? Burn it! No, despite my criticisms, I still think that there's a lot to be learned from this and compelling things about it, and it's had a big influence on literature in general through the centuries, but we should definitely contextualize it. And any respectable introduction to a classic book like this should highlight the dodgy attitudes that it's perpetuating, instead of just listing innumerable plot spoilers. Don't you hate it when introductions to classic books are filled with plot spoilers? But that's a whole other topic that I could go on about. And just because Boccaccio lived hundreds of years ago, I don't think he should be excused for including misogynistic views in the structure, not just the details of his stories. And I'm not saying that Boccaccio should be brought back from the dead so his zombie corpse can be burned at the stake. Brains. But we should call out his wrong-footed views, and not just defend him because he wrote a 950-page wankfest hundreds of years ago. And I'm pretty sure a big part of the reason for this book's longevity is because people like reading about all the blasphemous sex. But it strikes me as strange that people are so eager to defend classic authors just because they've been canonized as classics. Why is that? As Adam says in his most recent video, I'm sure there were a lot worse men in the 1300s, but that doesn't change the fact that he wrote a misogynistic book. The level of sexist humor in this book reminds me of, to use a recent politically inflammatory term, locker room humor that I've had to listen to my whole life in male environments. And I'm sick of it. No, he doesn't get a free pass. I'm so ashamed. If Boccaccio were alive today, I hope he would be ashamed. I grew up in a small town that was like 99% white, and as a child I had some pretty, like, not extreme, but like some slightly like sexist, racist, and homophobic ideas. I was ignorant. I'm not proud of that, but I grew up, I learned, I listened, I changed my point of view. That's how we evolve as people, as a society, as a culture. Just because you're too ignorant to see beyond the prejudices of the society you live in at a particular time does not excuse you from writing or saying something that strips other people of their humanity. And when we come across this, we should call it out, because when we don't critique and condemn the dangerous ideologies found in our past great works of art, we become complicit in their ability to dehumanize. Point of reference: Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Charles Marlowe travels into savage Africa and is stricken with madness and obsession. Chinua Achebe famously condemned the way this novel dehumanized Africans because Conrad was blinkered with xenophobia. Another point of reference: The L-Shaped Room by Lynne Reid Banks, which I read recently. This is a more recent classic, which was first published in 1960, so you could or could not call it a classic book, but because it's published by Vintage Classics, that means that some institutions do consider it a classic book. And in many ways, it's an extraordinary, groundbreaking feminist novel which portrays an unwed pregnant woman making her own way in London. But it also includes some truly cringeworthy, racist, and homophobic views. It describes gay men as abnormal. It refers to her black neighbor as having an animal and a Negro odor. Recently, Lynne Reid Banks reread this novel and was appalled by these views. But she didn't think that they should be taken out because they really reflected the way that people talked and thought back then. So, what's your view about classic books? How should problematic classics be read? Have you ever read a classic book whose narrow-minded or antiquated views made you put it down? Should we reconfigure the motherfucking canon? Comment below. And if you have any other ideas for bookish chats that I should have, let me know those as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll chat to you again soon. Brains. Female brains.